Boeing's annual report begins by addressing directly the most recent controversies. And to me, this signals how much the company has truly tried to turn their company culture around. Their transparency and open door policies are on full display for the world to see. But after this, the annual report continues and insists that, quote, demand for our products and services across all markets remains incredibly strong. In 2023, our commercial backlog increased by 23%. So what is the demand for? We already discussed their biggest and most troubled line, the 737, but what other Boeing aircraft does an airline have to choose from? Are they all as troubled as the 737 MAX? In this video, we will discuss all the commercial aircraft Boeing is currently manufacturing and delivering to customers. First up, we have the Boeing 767. Its story begins in the early 80s when Boeing was responding to a market demand for a wide body that was slightly smaller than the 747, but still suitable for transcontinental routes. It was designed virtually at the same time as the 757, with its design starting slightly before the 757's. Its first flight taking place in 1981. In general, the 767 has been a success for Boeing, and its subsequent variants have also been successful, the -300 and -400ER. There's also a military tanker variant, the KC-46. These iterations have showcased the versatility of the 767 and its adaptability to meet the diverse needs of its customers, both commercial and military. Like the 757, Boeing's design philosophy for the 767 was centered around efficiency, which was a new main focus for Boeing as a response to the high oil prices of the 70s. The 767 was the first Boeing plane to introduce a two-crew glass cockpit, a cutting-edge innovation at the time. Essentially, what this means is there was no longer a need for a third person called a flight engineer in the cockpit. This, coupled with advanced avionics, significantly improved the aircraft's operational capabilities and reduced the workload on the flight crews. The 767 has had more than 4 decades of service, proving to be the 3rd best-selling aircraft launched in the 80s and the 12th best of all time. As always, when we discuss a new aircraft on the channel, we will use the ultimate aircraft ranking system I developed to do the comparison. It's a system I painstakingly developed in order to standardize the key metric categories of aircraft in a way that lets us compare aircraft of any type of any era. It is meant to score these aircraft in the most objective way possible. This is done by scoring an aircraft based on 5 weighted categories. Those categories are cost, speed, versatility, innovation, and effectiveness. Each category has metrics assigned to them that lets us compare aircraft with similar roles from its era. After comparing these metrics, the aircraft is then given a score from 1 to 10, 10 being the highest based off of these metrics. If you want to know more about the details, feel free to check out the video I made explaining the full methodology behind the system. The inflation-adjusted cost per unit of the 767 is $217 million, or $579,000 per passenger. Not a great price, but not too atrocious, with plenty of well-selling aircraft coming in with similar costs per seat. It gets a 4 for cost. As for speed, the 767 is pretty middle of the road with a cruise speed of Mach 0.80. It gets a 5 for speed. For versatility, as I mentioned earlier, it has several variants including the KC-46 and the E767. It sports an above average range of 7,580 miles and a max passenger count of a single configuration of 375 people. Considering its range and its large seat count combined with a pretty successful run of variants, it gets an 8 for versatility. I already mentioned a few of the innovations present on the 767, including the two-crew cockpit. It was also the first Boeing aircraft to have an ETOP certification. The 767's fuel efficiency was 96.9 miles per gallon per seat for medium-haul flights, which is the best wide-body efficiency to date until the 787 overtook it 10 years later. Other than these few innovations, it really wasn't trying to do anything too momentous as far as innovation, so it gets a 6 for innovation. As for effectiveness, the 767 has been in production for 43 years. There's 764 still in service, and 1,311 units have been produced, which means the 767 makes up about 2.5% of every commercial aircraft ever produced. In my prior videos, I explained how important safety is to my effectiveness score and explained 2 factors that I use to compare how safe an aircraft is, whole loss factor and fatality factor. But it's essentially a factor of how safe an aircraft is, with a score of 1 being average and anything below 1 is safer or better than average. That being said, the 767 gets a whole loss factor score of 0.28 and a fatality factor of 0.34, which is one of the safest aircraft of its era. Certainly not as safe as other aircraft that have been designed in recent history, but it's still pretty good, and it gets a score of 6 for effectiveness. This earns the Boeing 767 an overall score of 6.40. Next up, we have the Boeing 777. Its tale begins in the 90s, an era marked by growing need for fuel-efficient, long-range aircraft. The 777 introduced a state-of-the-art fly-by-wire control system as well, allowing for more precise control and reducing the workload on flight crews. Additionally, its spacious and quiet interior set a new standard for long-haul comfort. The 777 has also been a crowd favorite due to its spacious cabin and large windows. The 777 has a price tag of $217 million, coming in at around $395,000 per passenger, which is below average and the most affordable wide-body aircraft on a per-seat basis. It gets a 7 for cost. As for speed, it's got a pretty good speed of Mach 0.84 and is only really outclassed by a handful of aircraft. It gets an 8 for speed. As for versatility, the 777 has been a pretty successful freighter variant. It sports a range of 9,845 miles, which is the third longest of any commercial aircraft ever, and a max passenger count of a single class configuration of 550, which is the third highest capacity, only outclassed again by the A380 and the 747. Although it doesn't have quite as many variants as some of the aircraft that we've talked about previously, but it has a fantastic range and great passenger count, which earns it a score of 7 for versatility. As far as innovation goes, I already mentioned that it was the first CAD-designed commercial aircraft, but it also featured other impressive innovations such as its fiber optic avionics, which was a first for Boeing, and its industry-leading large windows, as I mentioned earlier. It has a fuel efficiency for medium-haul routes of 88 miles per gallon per seat, which is the second best at its launch, but it was second to the A320, which did launch 10 years prior to it. It was then overtaken by the 767 2 years later. For long-haul routes, its efficiency was 81 miles per gallon per seat, which was the best in class until the 747 overtook it years later. Currently, it stands as a pretty good middle-of-the-ground efficiency aircraft. Certainly, its innovation was aided by the fact that they involved airlines early in the R&D phase, and it certainly showed in the final result of the aircraft. It gets a 7 for innovation. The 777 has been in production for over 30 years now and has 1,300 units in service, a total units produced of 1,729, which is the 6th most produced aircraft already, and it makes up about 3.35% of every commercial aircraft ever produced. Its whole loss factor is 0.10, which is pretty impressive. It also has a similarly impressive fatality factor of 0.17. Looking at the stats, it really looks like the 777 was one of the aircraft that ushered in a completely new era of safety, earning it a score of 8 for its safety record and success as an aircraft line. That earns the 777 an overall score of 7.35. Next up is also a fan favorite, the 787 Dreamliner. The story of the Dreamliner began in the early 2000s, a time when the aviation industry was clamoring for a more efficient wide-body aircraft. It also aimed to take the place of the 767 as an even more efficient replacement to what was, at the time of the release, the most efficient aircraft on the market. Taking its cues from the successes of the 777 program, the 787 also aimed to respond to customer desires, with a special focus on the passenger experience and incorporating cost-saving measures to pass along to its operators. Like the 777, and unlike many prior Boeing aircraft, the 787 would seek to incorporate more innovation to its design philosophy. One of, if not the most impressive innovation, was the use of composite materials, like carbon fiber reinforced polymers, on the airframe. This marked a significant departure from the traditional predominantly aluminum structures. I already made a video talking about this materials trend that was initiated by Boeing, so if you're interested in learning more about carbon fiber and its applications in aerospace, make sure you check that out. The Dreamliner introduced a new level of fuel efficiency, which also featured the innovative electronically dimmable windows, which is an absolute game changer for anyone that hates that one guy that never shuts his blinds.
I'm calm!
Reception of the 787 has been generally good, passengers praising its cabin experience and airlines praising its efficiency. But that of course did not come without some drawbacks. Boeing also took this time to outsource much of the manufacturing process in an attempt to reduce costs. This move ultimately put the aircraft far behind schedule and led to many delays in delivery to customers. But that did not stop it from becoming the fastest selling widebody in history. That's all despite of its hefty price tag of $292.5 million, which is a per passenger cost of $665,000, the second most expensive Boeing and the third most expensive aircraft on a per seat basis. It gets a 2 for cost. The 787 is also a pretty speedy aircraft, replacing what was the 747 slot as the fastest aircraft in production, coming in at a cruise speed of Mach 0.85. It gets a 9 for speed. As for versatility, the 787 really hasn't had a chance to have too many variants, only with a small number of Boeing business jets. Its range is 8,710 miles, which is the 4th best in production today, and has a max passenger count of a single class configuration of 440, which is 4th in production today. It gets a 6 for versatility. As far as innovation goes, I already mentioned the fact that it took huge strides in the materials area. It was the first commercial aircraft to feature over 50% of its weight in composites. It has the largest windows on a commercial aircraft. It has larger overhead bins and has better cabin pressurization, which makes the flight more comfortable for all of its passengers. It also incorporated a technology called anti-gust alleviation, which is a system that reduces the effect of turbulence on the aircraft. It's also 60% quieter than its predecessor and 20% more fuel efficient than the 767, which previously was the most fuel efficient medium haul aircraft. As for fuel efficiency on short haul routes, the 787 gets 98 miles per gallon per seat, which is about average performance for short haul carriers of modern produced aircraft, but it's a much more competitive space than it typically flies in. For medium haul routes, it gets 104 miles per gallon, which is the 3rd best in medium haul carriers, and 104 miles per gallon per seat on long haul flights, which is the best efficiency for any long haul carrier, which is a huge leg up on the competition. Its extremely reliable engines has earned it a 330-minute ETOPS certification, which means it can fly flights like the one I took from Toronto to Tokyo, or the one I also took last year from Dallas to Auckland, also on a 787. And yes, in full disclosure, I am a fan of the 787, so I tried not to make that impact my rating. All of this innovation combined with a new focus on outsourcing meant that the 787 was met with enormous program delays, but also more orders before it had even had its first flight than any other wide-body aircraft before it. All in all, it gets an 8 for innovation. The 787 has now been in production for 15 years and has 1,115 aircraft in service and has had 1,129 aircraft produced. In recent years, it has become one of the most successful aircraft families, already 16th most produced overall. Although it's one of the youngest aircraft families, it already makes up 2.19% of every commercial aircraft ever produced. As for safety, it has the single greatest safety record of any Boeing aircraft ever, with a whole loss factor of exactly 0 and a fatality factor of exactly 0, since no 787 has ever been a total loss and there has not been a single fatality on any 787 aircraft. It's the first Boeing aircraft with a perfect safety record. But in recent years, and due to the aforementioned difficulties with the supply chain and delivering them on time, it has shown some softening in orders. Overall, it gets a 7 for effectiveness. Overall, the Dreamliner earns a score of 6.95. Having now discussed every Boeing aircraft in production, how did they stack up against each other? In last place, to no one's surprise, we have the Boeing 737 MAX with a score of 5.25. Next, we have the Boeing 737 Original / Classic with a score of 6.25. 6.1. Next, we have the Boeing 767 with a score of 6.40. Next up, we have the 787 Dreamliner with a score of 6.95. And at the very top of our current production list, we have the Boeing 777 with a score of 7.35. My next video will be a pretty long video of a compilation of all the Boeing aircraft that I've already discussed, which means every Boeing jetliner produced, and will feature the entire aircraft ranking, meaning every single aircraft I've already ranked on this channel will be at the end of that video. So if you want to be notified for when that video comes out, so you can see that list and how all of these Boeing aircraft rank up against each other, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell to be notified of when that comes out. And if you made it this far in this video, thank you so much for watching, and Godspeed.